Hello there. Well, it's time for Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi 1M4 Vader Contacts Luke. Music by John Williams, orchestrated by Thomas Newman, of all people. A very young Thomas Newman at that point. This is a really interesting cue because most of it is not in the final cut of the film, but it is. I managed to find it. But the bit of the film really starts at this bar here, which is bar 28 in my sort of bit. Crotch equals 82, that sort of thing. But bearing in mind that a lot of that material actually comes in earlier, which we don't really hear, obviously. And this whole cue is basically Vader contacting Luke to sort of say, join me with the dark side of the Force, and then Luke's just making his lightsaber. Which is about that point, I think, where we hear the main theme or Luke's theme. And then the droids are sort of, why have we come to this dreadful planet and all this sort of thing. I thought we were supposed to, rescue Han Solo. So that's kind of where we're at. And then there's a bit of a sort of, they trundle along to Jabba's palace. All very interesting. And you'll see from this screen that there's an enormous amount going on. So where do we really begin? Well, let's begin with the size of the orchestra, first of all. So there are supposed to be 3 flutes, 2 oboes, and a cor, so an extra oboe, really. 2 clarinets, bass clarinet. Sometimes the bass clarinet doubles as third. And, of course, one of the flutes doubles as piccolo, of course. Contrabassoon, 2 bassoons, 6 horns, 3 trumpets, not 4, 3 trombones, not 4, 1 tuba, not 2, timp perk, 1 harp, not 2, 1 keyboard, not 2, and strings. And really, the orchestration is very sparing and quite spooky. And we have a lot of divisi with some solo desks and solo violin as well, which is really interesting. So there's a sort of interesting mix of different sorts of forces here. So, for example, we'll have the violin solo at this point, which is just doing little pizzicato things. Let's just make that a little bit bigger. Sometimes it's actually quite hard to click on the note because the thing's in the way. Like that. And then we've got a little bit more solo violin pizzicato, but we've also got, first desk of violin 2s. Let's just make that a little bit clearer as well. Erase the background. Where they also glissing with artificial harmonics as well, just one solo to each, one instrument to each line, which is really interesting. And the way that it all works in terms of pitch collection is absolutely fascinating. The more I delved into it, the more I sort of thought, oh my word, this is just work of the most organised quality. And it just isn't coincidental because it can't be. It's just no way. Because all the notes, apart from one pitch in the entire page that you see, is all derived from 2 scales. The octatonic scale, which is semitone, tone, semitone, tone, although you can start it on the tone, semitone, tone, semitone, etc. But it's an alternating scale. The hexatonic scale, or A hexatonic scale, but in this case it is the hexatonic scale, which is 6/20. That's the pitch class set that Alan Fort gives it, which is simply minor second, minor third, minor second, minor third, etc. And with the octatonic scale, it's using all of the transpositions, of which there are 3. The original starting on middle C, the next one starting on C sharp, and the next one starting on D. It's a mode of limited transposition because if you started on E flat, you get back to octatonic T0 again. In other words, transposed by 0 semitones. This hexatonic is a D hexatonic, so a D minor. And then you would just get to D again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's such a sort of particular sort of Star Wars thing. And what's remarkable is that, for example, the bass line that we see, which is the bass descent from the horns, like that, which starts off with a sort of, Rachmaninoff C sharp minor prelude, but transposed. Basically, all of those notes are actually taken from hexatonic 6/20, which then sort of foreshadows this whole bit here, where we hear for the tutti violins like that, which is really remarkable because we got sort of D minor with a flat 6 and then F sharp minor with a flat 6 like that as well, both of which are derived entirely from this hexatonic set. But I'm jumping ahead of myself because the other bits of pitch organisation are all octatonic, and it's really fascinating to see which bits join which other bits, and they all seem sort of connected in terms of role as well. So we have, here it starts off with an octatonic 2 subset. In other words, all of this material the upper bit is all from octatonic 2. These little bits you could kind of argue are from octatonic T0, because when we get to this moment, we all have all of these pitches are from octatonic T1. And we have this extraordinary sort of collection, and the other reason why that is also there is because of these other notes here. So in other words, the accompanying material, or the other bits of material, are from a different transposition of octatonic scale than the main sort of harmony, let's say, which is sort of that bit but without the bottom 2 notes. Really, really, really extraordinary. And then everything else, the melodic material, is derived from octatonic T0. So we have 3 octatonic transpositions all at the same time, which makes it chromatic essentially. But it's not atonal, and it's weird. The weird thing with a lot of Williams is that when it sounds atonal, it's often not entirely atonal, and it's because he mixes modes, and this is a mixed mode. In other words, there are 2 mixed modes, of which 2 of them are transposed by semitones as well. So, for example, the material here is all octatonic T0. There's not one note that isn't. There is one anomalous note A. That could be an error, or it could be simply because of the fact that Williams does like putting in curveballs occasionally, and he does like including anomalous notes. Usually there's only one anomalous note. He doesn't need more than one to sort of just offset it a little bit, make it even more gnarly and atonal, perhaps, or to throw off people like me analysing it. And also to make it not necessarily recognisable as an octatonic scale. But there is a precedent for it in the previous film, and I was considering the bit where it's Solo and the Princess, basically, where Vader is contacting the Emperor, and we get all of that sort of really weird, creepy material. And there are sort of instances of quite a few octatonic pitches here. They're very much more Klangfarben melody, sort of Webern-esque things with sort of slightly different timbres on each thing, but it generally is in strings. It's generally quite slow, and we have pitches that are derived from there, but it's very sort of, it's quite complicated to kind of work it all out. Bits of that, there's a little bits of double harmonic, actually double harmonic major I think it's supposed to be, but there we go, octatonic as well. So there is a precedent for having sort of octatonic pitches when thinking about the dark side in that particular vein. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility that he had that in mind when he was writing this. Maybe that he has a sort of a study of things, but he'll know what the octatonic scale is, so he can just recall it. But I like the idea of him combining different ones at different points, because you can really see the organisation. It's almost like when you analyse sometimes Aaron Copland, you can see his thinking process in the way that he writes, with basically additional material or additional motivic material that adds to the initial motivic material. In this case, it seems to be Williams sort of adding octatonic collections to make it more gnarly, to make the whole thing a little bit more obtuse and a little bit more, sort of irregular, let's say. But all of these clusters are octatonic clusters, with one exception, this one with the anomalous A. And then at the end of this sort of interesting thing with clarinet, horn, flute, sort of quite disparate timbres, and strings as a sort of a harmonic bedrock, we then get into the strings taking on a melodic role at this point, going like this. Like that, with a sort of hanging B flat, which eventually goes into the B natural of the hexatonic scale that we already had. So back to this, you know, if you extrapolate all the notes here, I haven't done it as a B flat major 9. I've done it as a D minor with a flat 6 because he uses that so many times, and it's just a thing in Star Wars. Exactly the same in the bass line here, which is actually confusingly above there, which is an F sharp minor with a flat 6. With Harp picking out some of those notes as well, which then you have that sort of interesting, like that. I didn't really play it with all the correct notes. Like that, just sort of picking out some of the notes in the first two beats of that. They're all from this Hexatonic 620. Sometimes difficult to see, but let's just go through it. So we got D, F, then F sharp or G flat, A, B flat, and then C sharp. Like that. So that's where the pitch material comes from. And we have sustains now in the wind, whereas before we had sustains in the strings. So all of that is now sustained. The bass is the bass, it's just sort of chromatically moving. So we've got sort of F sharp minor flat 6 for the C sharp in the bass, or D flat in the bass. We've also got D minor flat 6 as well. That's the anomalous note here, because when you take everything else, then it is a hexatonic but down a tone, which is there, because we can see the G, the B natural, the A flat, the C as well, and that's it. That's all there is. So it's just with that anomalous note there, which again gives it that sort of particular sort of gnarly quality, a deliberate dissonance inside the mode, the prevailing mode. And that is a technique that he uses quite a number of times. I was tempted to sort of, you know, analyse that in terms of sort of a Tristan thing, but it's not really. You know, it's not really, because it's just a gesture of that, and then just transposed up a sort of augmented fifth at that point. And that's sort of, I guess, a reversal of that. So there's a sort of symmetry about it. Because it's on its own, it then leads naturally into a completely different sort of tonality. At this point, still hexatonic, but actually it's a more recognised chord, because we've got an E flat chord. So that's G, E flat and B. And we've got that sort of basically supporting the Luke's theme. But there's a little bit of gnarl on there, like that, which is the 7 and sharp 9 as well, which just makes it that little bit more gnarly. In this case, E flat major 7 with a sharp 9, just missing the B natural to make it E flat major 7 sharp 9 and a flat 13 as well would be amazing, like that. I think it's supposed to be A there, but never mind, we'll skirt over that. But basically it's still a hexatonic subset. And then we're moving down to another sort of first inversion type chord with a sort of added 2, which is just a sort of verticalized version of the Force theme, if you think about it. Just with the bass line C. And then that sort of whole material just simply stops, because we then get into this Giacoso bit, which is really, really interesting. It's I've tried to sort of simplify the analysis of it, because you could analyze every single quaver, and it does all have sort of tonal implications. So, for example, the beginning just immediately sounds like a sort of Bartok piece or a Shostakovich piece or Prokofiev, that sort of thing. And it's deliberately sort of regular but melodically angular. like that. And the bassoons provide the accompaniment, which is just a chromatic accompaniment. Like that, with lots of major thirds. So it becomes a sort of interesting tonal device because we've got... So it's a sort of A minor but with a C in it, in the bass, with a little chromatic auxiliary note, neighbouring note I think you call it in the States. And then it sort of just goes up. But then it's his favourite sort of atonal chord, which is this 3-3 chord. So in other words, D, F and F sharp combined is part of a sort of major minor tonality at that point. So if you put them in to my little pitch class set calculator, it comes up as set 3-3, or the fort name is set 3-3, of which the prime form is like that. But there are two different versions of it. So if you look in the list of 3-3, there are two little versions, 0-1-4 and 0-3-4. And 0-3-4, this 3-3-B, seems to be the one that Williams tends to go for. O just means middle C. They're just numbers instead of notes. 1, 2, 3 would be an E flat. 4 is an E natural. And if you go a little bit further down to... where are we? 4 something else. 417, 0-3-4, 7. So, for example, it's part of a sort of little alpha chord, sort of symmetrical design as well. So, a little bit of pitch class set theory for you for this one. But in other words, he tends to use it as sort of an atonal chord, or as a quasi-atonal chord, but it often mixes well because it's also, you know, if you do supersets with this, the cardinality, we can go, okay, well, what are the sort of different chords that can use it? 417, 418, 419. Now, those 3 sets are all from different things. We've got, you know, an alpha chord, diminished major 7th chord. We've got a major minor chord with a major 7th, or major chord with a flat 6, I think it is. All of those, that's just 4-note chords. Then I'm going to go into 6-note chords. So 620 would be a hexatonic. So it's part of a... Oh, there we go, just skirted past it. So it is contained in the hexatonic set, 620. 722, I think it is going into... Where are we? They've reorganised this now. That's interesting. So 722 is the double harmonic scale. So that's the one of which the Hungarian minor is a mode of it. So it's got 3 instances in there. And it's also an octatonic as well, 828. So, and probably nonatonic, 912. There we go. So it contains all of the things that Williams uses. So that's why I think he uses it as a nice bridging thing between tonality, different modes. It's such an important device, often found in that formation, which Mark Richards describes in his course as an 0811, 01, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 in terms of the spacing, so not including O as middle C, but starting as a relative, in this case on E natural, of what I'm playing. So we skirt into that, and then it goes into more of a sort of augmented and ambiguous bit. So by the 3rd bar, all sort of passing chords really. So a sort of A7 type chord, but then a really weird chord here where we got C sharp, G, A flat and C natural. So that's really, really gnarly. But notice that the outside notes are a major 7th, which again is a crucial interval for him. He uses that a great deal. Then just a diad on its own. And very, very gnarly at that point. So ambiguous. I haven't even bothered to try and sort of analyse that because it's not really possible to. Then we get a sort of verticalised 0134. So if we think, well, what's 0134? What on earth does that mean? If I type in 0134, so you'll see, actually, those are the first 4 notes of the octatonic scale, and I can go and check. So we're looking for 828, if that comes up. And it does. So this set is actually called 4-3, but it's contained in the octatonic scale. I much prefer this now. The list has changed. So 0134. By the way, all of this stuff, interval vector, just means the amount. It's a column. The first number tells you how many minor seconds there are. Then the major seconds, how many minor thirds, how many major thirds, how many perfect fourths, and how many augmented fourths. And everything else is an inversion of those notes. That's why that they're there. And you get sort of strange things where you get sort of similar bits which share the same interval content, or IC. So, for example, this 4-4 or 4-4B, that sort of thing. So yeah, 0134 is a DSCH motif that Shostakovich used. So sometimes they have really helpful little etceteras here. They're not always to be entirely trusted. It's not just a DSCH motif, it's also a octatonic subset. So I wonder whether that's a thing. But of course, DSCH, Shostakovich uses the octatonic scale extensively, as do a lot of Russian composers of that sort of ilk. But it's not wholly octatonic, but it's slightly more octatonic, I've said. So I'm sure this reminds me of a specific piece, but can't think what it is. And it's this sort of idea. It just sounds a bit like a sort of Shostakovich 15th Symphony. It's not in there, but it sort of reminds me of it. Or even Stravinsky, A Soldier's Tale, that sort of very deliberate, sort of ironic type of music. Yeah, it's sort of quite hard to describe, but basically that's sort of what it reminded me of. And all of these pitches are really derived over these sorts of polychords. So here we've got sort of, you know, B with a sharp 9, sharp 11, sharp 13, but really it's D minor over B major, like that. So we've often got those sorts of polychord as well. And you can sort of see from here. So the typical root, 5th, 3rd, which everybody uses, and then a Brahms at the top. Sort of thumb, 3rd finger, and then 5th finger. You know, that sort of thing. You can just sort of imagine lots of Brahms pieces using the same sort of hand position. Not just Brahms, it's obviously other people as well, but there we go. And then that chord is sort of essentially just transposed down to an A7 with a sharp 11, so it pretty much the same chord. And here we've got the A7 or bit, and we could sort of include that within it. And then a sort of C minor at the top as well. That sort of thing. So a lot of these sort of polychord type sort of formations. So notice that the G, actually it's sort of more of an A chord. I put A7, but really the C, it's more of a polychord really, isn't it? So in this case, C minor over A major. Let's put an AG afterwards just to make it really clear. I think probably easier to describe it that way, really. And you can also sort of think, oh, okay, is that another pitch set as well? Is that something that is a thing? So A minor, sorry, C minor, A major. I think that's it, isn't it? Let's just start again. I've sort of lost my train of thought. So that's it. That's C minor and then A major. Boom, boom, boom. There we go. 6Z49. Is that a thing? Not sure whether it is. I don't think it's got any special thing. No, not really. But it could be an interesting subset of something, and that's where you sort of can go, is an octatonic subset? Yes, it is. There we go. So it's often quite revealing. Where you can just put in your notes and then it kind of tells you what it's a subset of. And we already know that the whole thing is sort of octatonically based. But this is completely different material, but it's still octatonically based, which I find amazing. So that sort of wonderful melody, sort of angular tune sort of continues, and we have this sort of weird interjections. which I'm not sure whether it's a sort of, R2-D2 pretending to be all military-esque and sort of I'm on a mission, or whether it's C-3PO going, putting his foot down going, I don't want to go. We're not sure. But either way, it's sort of almost like a sort of R2-D2 C-3PO type moment at that point. So then we've got sort of really interesting chords where we have a sort of major minor type of thing. So an A chord with C minor, like that. Sort of octatonic melody, part sequence, upper semitone. Then we have another sequence in the trombone. So where we have like that, and then solo horn as well, like that. And this time we've got an interesting sort of case here where we got with the harp, which is just a Mixolydian mode, so same as the major scale with the flat 7. But also you'll notice that the accompanying material is a sort of A with a sharp 4, an added sharp forward, like a Lydian A. So it's an interesting that we got sort of that sort of mixed mode, basically Mixolydian B and Lydian A, but essentially it's sort of pan-diatonic because it just uses the same notes as well. Then it goes into more of the sort of alpha chord thing, which is also an octatonic idea, but also we know it's also a hexatonic thing as well. So, interesting. So we've got C major minor. Like that, but with 2 octaves apart as well. So flute and bassoon, a typical sort of 2 octave or 3 octave levels, if you see what I mean. That level, and that level. But that's all sort of C minor major type accompaniment, which is a typical device that he uses. So in this case, it's like the wrong note bass has actually become part of the chord, like that. So yeah, basically C based. Then it just goes to a B minor major chord and then to an A minor major chord. So it's nice, a little sequence of material, which sort of, now that they're off, they've been sort of squabbling about it, and now they're off to Jabba's palace at that point. Then we've got an interesting thing with B flat with C, which is almost into the sort of Starry Night territory of the very beginning. Where we also have B flat, add 9, add 11. Really, it's just C above B flat, isn't it? And again, notice the figuration: root, 5th, 3rd, all over the place. More of the sort of little sort of militaristic, like that, and this sort of just continues. And then it goes into more of the like that, with more quintal stuff going on in the bass line. And then we have the sort of with Maurice Murphy playing that fantastic trumpet solo, which just sounds so wonderful. It sounds so Shostakovich-y, Prokofiev, that sort of thing. Really interesting. And then we get definitely a sort of Starry Night sort of thing, with C over C org, like that. And then some other notes here. So chromatic mediants abound, and sort of, little auxiliary notches or sort of auxiliary pitches. And then it ends in a sort of augmented type of flavour as well. Sort of like, we'll see what happens next type chord, basically, is what that is. So it's a really wonderful cue and just so much in it. Now, as I'm doing with all of these, I'm going to go and look at the orchestration of it as well, because there are a lot of cuts in this as well. But yeah, you can see just instantly here in terms of the way it's positioned. I've put violin solo up there. The tutti violins are here. The second violins are there. They're not divided at that point. The violas are divided. The cellos are divided, because basically they're just kind of doing what that's doing. So we start off with this. This is all the sort of Vadar stuff. quite still. So yeah, worth talking about that. So we've got the sort of the bass line that we know what it's all about. This is really interesting. So you've got violin, solo violin still, but then you've got violins divisi a 3. We've then got violin 2s divisi a 2, but also the first desk are playing those notes here, which is this bit. Once it gets going. With a very slow gliss. We've then got divisi cellos, or sorry, violas at that point, which is divisi a 4, basic, or divisi a 3. Then we've got more divisi a 2 cellos as well. So a lot of that, and basically that's all this bit here. That's all of that stuff. All those sort of octatonic collections with very high flute. Unusually, it's flute rather than piccolo at this point. Notice how the tuba just supports those very low horns. That's quite low horn writing. This is transposing score, so they're all the way down there. Real sort of pedal tone, sort of almost. That's why they're slightly reddish, because Sibelius thinks, oh, be careful, only a pro can play that. Well, it's the LSO, don't worry, they're fine. And then we get into our nice interlocked pitches with clarinet above. Actually, is it interlocked? Yes, it is. So we got the D, then the A in the bassoon, then the F sharp in the clarinet, and then the lowest note there. In fact, I'll take transposing score off, which is this, hexatonic bit. And you'll see after all of that divisi, suddenly they're all unison melodically, because we want that to carry with strings and horns, which is very popular without the wind in film music. I don't know whether you noticed that, but it's definitely a thing. So the harmony role is in the brass. And it's almost like the harp is sort of almost like a little guitar sort of fluttering in the background almost. And then we get the wonderful bit on the horns carrying Luke's theme. Like that. And that's a typical device where you've got tremolo in the violas but nowhere else. So we've got a sort of stability in the bass line. Is there anything else doubling the bass? No. We've got harmony here, which is sort of also kind of a little bit in the harp as well. Is there any other harmony? Yes, we've got a little bit of that sort of harmonic stuff. And it's as if the harp is sort of bridging the gap between that bit of the accompaniment and this bit of the accompaniment. Just little gestures. So once it's all put together, there's the trem but with non-trem bass. Just provides that little bit of energy. And then we're into a completely different thing. And you'll notice, of course, when it is a completely different thing, totally different instrumentation. At this point, we've got clarinet and bassoon. Now, it's not that they haven't been playing before. They have. So there's a certain continuity with the timbre. It's just that their role is now completely different, and they carry all of the melodic material and accompaniment material and the bass line. So this is this section here. Yeah, sort of very droid-like, almost sort of electronic type of sound where that sort of oboe comes in very, very low. Interestingly, not produced on the core. And I think maybe that was a sort of, it could have been one of their, a conversation at that point. Do you want it on the core anglais because it's quite low? No, I want to keep it on the oboe, thanks. Oh, okay. No, I understand that. Sometimes can be really, really effective. As well. Then, as we progress, we've got more of this sort of divisi strings, harmonic roll. like that. And you'll see that the melodic roll is by different instruments. Yeah. And so at that point, all of the violins are then, because it's sort of expectant thing, they're all tremolandering, including the cellos at that point. So let's just listen to that. That's our add sharp 4 chord with our sort of nice B Mixolydian, along with the horns taking the melodic roll with a little 2/4 bar. Lots of more gliss. So that's our minor major. Notice also so frequently that little bass pizzicato as a sort of reply, but it often comes in unexpected places. I wonder whether other composers would have gone and then left the pizzicato to after that ba-da-dum bum bum, and either put it right at the end of the bar or put it a quaver beat later than this bit here. So in other words, this whole bit here could be there, or it could even be a little bit later on. And it's interesting if you sort of like, you know, you can do this sort of with scoring notation, which is quite interesting. Let's see what the effect is if I delay it. And it could be something on screen, actually, so it's not entirely fair to do this. Yeah, so it provides a different sort of energy, basically. But it's just interesting, the choice of it being there. It's a sort of Shostakovich thing, sometimes deliberately altering the meter. And it's therefore crucial to keep these going as crotchets, because if you don't, the energy completely dissipates from bar 29 at the end of that bar. Because we kind of reached it at this point here. So that note here is crucial to then make everything else continue in the way that it needs to. So then we're back into sort of block chordal homophony, and the same sort of thing. That oboe line is cut, sadly, or the cor anglais line is cut. Then we go into the trumpet bit. Harmonic roll. Yeah. So all of this sort of dark things, bass clarinet, bassoon, contrabassoon, notice that that's supported with the trem, cello and bass, which is interesting. Bass supported really in a sense with the bass drum. So it's fine for it to be tremolandering. Sometimes it's not very effective to have tremolander on bass. It just sounds like a sort of, you can't really hear what's going on. It's just a mess, but it's supposed to be a bit messy. Hence the bass drum actually supports that. Horn taking a particular sort of pedal roll along with a flute, almost like as if it's the last note of a melody, even though it wasn't. Just adding a little bit of extra harmony there, really. Very dark at that point. But notice the bass drum is still going along with the contrabass, an E flat as well, so below the E string, so on their C extension. Probably quite difficult to tune at that point as well, hence that they're divided, maybe that helps. But very, very low indeed, you know, quite muddy, deliberately so really, because that's in close part harmony at that point. Although this isn't, that's an octave lower, so it's fine at that point. Don't know why it did a sort of weird. That's what we got there. And then 2 bass clarinets, so the second clarinet actually doubles as a bass clarinet in this one as well. So it's sort of nice little orchestration exercise as well for the material, because the material is, you know, really complicated. Look at all those sort of ridiculous sort of octatonic sort of bits, basically, which is all of this sort of fluff, harmonic fluff. So that is that cue, and then the next one is extremely short, just a page long. I probably should have done that as well, but it's quite nice just to sort of keep them separate, I think, just for the sake of continuity. And it's a shame that, you know, a lot of the music was cut, because it's really, really fun, and just reminds me, as I said before, of I haven't got it there. It's here, of this bit from Solo and the Princess. All of that sort of emperor contacting the son of Skywalker meant not become a Jedi. All of that stuff. And I can't wait to bring the Emperor to you in this series, because he's just so much fun. Ian McDermott, just terrific, absolutely brilliant. So that's it all for now, folks. I will see you again very soon. Bye for now.